My brother didn't whisper the insult. He projected it across the mahogany boardroom table like he was announcing quarterly earnings. Maybe if Arlene spent less time at the buffet and more time understanding basic finance, she'd grasp why her department is hemorrhaging money. 14 executives stared at their leather portfolios. Nobody laughed, but nobody defended me either. My face burned as I clutched the presentation remote. The numbers on the screen behind me, my numbers, my projections, suddenly felt meaningless. Julian leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing that smile he'd perfected since we were kids. The smile that said he'd already won. What he didn't know was that tucked inside my briefcase was a manila folder containing documentation that would destroy him. But I wasn't ready to use it yet. Not here, not now. I needed him to feel safe first. My name is Arlene Whitmore. I'm 41 years old, and I've spent the last 19 years building the operations division of Whitmore Industries from the ground up. The company manufactures industrial filtration systems, unglamorous work that keeps water clean and factories running. My father, Charles Whitmore, founded the company 43 years ago in a garage with 2 employees and a dream. By the time I joined at 22, fresh out of business school, we had 300 employees and contracts across 6 states. I was the operations manager then, overseeing production schedules and supply chain logistics. Julian, my younger brother by 3 years, was given the vice president of sales position straight out of college. He had no experience, no credentials beyond our last name. But he was charming, handsome, and Dad's favorite. The weight comments started small. Julian would pat his flat stomach at lunch meetings and say things like, "Some of us have the discipline for a second helping, some don't." He'd suggest I take the stairs instead of the elevator, for my health. When I landed our biggest contract, a $12 million deal with a municipal water authority, he told the team it was beginner's luck, and that I'd probably celebrated with cake. I never responded. I documented everything instead. Every comment, every date, every witness. I kept a journal in my locked desk drawer, written in careful block letters so my handwriting wouldn't betray the rage I felt. Because here's what Julian didn't understand. I wasn't just the operations manager anymore. 6 months ago, Dad had a stroke. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning. Dad collapsed in his office while reviewing contracts. I was the one who found him, drool pooling on his mahogany desk, one side of his face slack. The ambulance ride, the emergency room, the ICU, it all blurred together. When he finally stabilized 3 days later, the neurologist was blunt. Dad would recover most of his physical abilities with therapy, but his cognitive processing was impaired. He couldn't manage complex decisions anymore. The board had to act fast. Someone needed to take control of the company. Julian assumed it would be him. He started referring to himself as acting CEO, before Dad was even out of intensive care. He moved into Dad's office, hung his degrees on the wall, ordered new business cards. What Julian didn't know was that Dad and I had been preparing for this possibility for 2 years. Not the stroke specifically, but succession planning. Dad had started forgetting things, small details at first, then bigger pieces of information. He'd ask me the same question 3 times in one meeting. He knew something was wrong. So we worked with the company attorney, Mitchell Crawford, to draft contingency documents. The key document was a durable power of attorney that named me as Dad's agent for all business decisions if he became incapacitated. It also included a provision that allowed me to appoint myself CEO if the board agreed I was qualified. Dad signed it in front of 3 witnesses. We locked it in Mitchell's office safe. I told no one, not even my husband. The board meeting where Julian insulted me was supposed to be routine. I was presenting the quarterly operations report. Production efficiency was up 18%, material waste was down 12%, and we'd completed a major equipment upgrade under budget. These were wins. But Julian interrupted me halfway through. "These numbers are cherry-picked," he announced. "Arlene is hiding the fact that her department overspent by $40,000 on safety equipment nobody asked for." The accusation was absurd. The safety equipment was mandated by new OSHA regulations. I had documentation proving it was legally required. But before I could respond, Julian stood up. He walked to the front of the room, positioning himself between me and the board. Maybe if Arlene spent less time at the buffet, he began. I let him finish. I let him list all the ways I was supposedly failing. I let him suggest that someone with more discipline and focus should run operations. I stood there, face burning, hands steady on the remote. When he finally sat down, looking pleased with himself, I simply said, "Are you finished?" He smirked. "Unless you have an actual defense." I clicked the remote. The next slide appeared, a full breakdown of the safety equipment costs, complete with the federal mandate documentation, purchase orders, and installation reports. The equipment was legally required as of January 1st, I said calmly. Failure to install it would have resulted in fines of up to $200,000 and potential facility closure. The room went quiet. Julian's smirk faded. "Moving on," I continued. After the meeting, I went straight to Mitchell Crawford's office. He was expecting me. "You're ready?" he asked, pulling a thick folder from his filing cabinet. Inside was the power of attorney, notarized and witnessed. Also inside was something else. A forensic audit I'd commissioned 3 months ago when I noticed irregularities in the sales department's expense reports. Julian had been padding his travel expenses, billing personal trips as business travel, and approving fraudulent vendor invoices for companies that didn't exist. The total misappropriation was close to $200,000. It wasn't embezzlement exactly. He'd kept it just within the gray area, but it was enough. Combined with his pattern of workplace harassment toward me, documented in my journal with witness corroboration, we had grounds for immediate termination with cause. Mitchell and I spent 2 hours that afternoon drafting the necessary documents. First, a formal notice to the board invoking the power of attorney and requesting an emergency vote on CEO appointment. Second, a termination letter for Julian outlining the grounds for dismissal. Third, a comprehensive report on the financial irregularities, ready to be filed with the corporate insurance company and, if necessary, law enforcement. Mitchell was thorough. "Once you do this," he warned, "there's no going back. Julian will fight. Your father might not understand." I thought about Dad in his rehabilitation facility, struggling to remember what day it was. I thought about 19 years of work, of late nights and early mornings, of building something real while Julian coasted on charm. "I know," I said. "Schedule the vote for Monday morning." I didn't tell Julian what was coming. I didn't tell anyone except my husband, Derek, who held me while I cried that night. Not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. The weekend was surreal. I visited Dad at the rehab center. He smiled when he saw me, though his speech was still slurred. "How's work?" he managed to ask. "Getting better," I told him. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 6. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8. I wore my best suit, navy blue, perfectly tailored, the one I'd bought when I closed that $12 million contract. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My reflection looked tired but determined. Today everything would change. The board members arrived confused. Emergency meetings usually meant crisis, lost contracts, equipment failure, something urgent. They filled the conference room with worried expressions and steaming coffee cups. Julian arrived last, looking annoyed. "What's this about?" he demanded. Mitchell stood up. "This meeting is being called to order pursuant to Section 7 of the corporate bylaws regarding emergency succession decisions." He distributed copies of the power of attorney. As you can see, Charles Whitmore designated his daughter, Arlene Whitmore, as his legal agent for all business decisions in the event of his incapacitation. Given Dr. Morrison's medical evaluation, he distributed the neurologist's report. Mr. Whitmore is currently unable to fulfill his duties as CEO. Arlene is invoking her authority to request a board vote on her appointment as Chief Executive Officer. Julian exploded. "This is a coup. You can't just, Dad wouldn't want Mitchell cut him off. The document is legally binding and was executed 2 years ago with full mental competency, witnessed by myself and 2 other attorneys. He gestured to the board. The bylaws require a simple majority vote. I recommend reviewing the operations reports from the past 5 years before voting. Arlene has increased production efficiency by 32%, reduced material costs by 18%, and secured 14 major contracts totaling over $80 million. Her division is the most profitable in the company. He didn't mention Julian's department performance. He didn't need to. The board members were already flipping through the documentation. Bernard Hughes, the oldest board member and Dad's longtime friend, looked at me carefully. Arlene, do you feel qualified for this responsibility? I stood up. My hands were shaking, so I pressed them flat against the table. I've given 19 years to this company. I know every production line, every supplier relationship, every contract detail. I know our employees' names and their children's names. I've been preparing for this role my entire career, not because I wanted Dad to get sick, but because I love this company and I'm ready to lead it. I looked at Julian. He was staring at me with pure hatred. I'm not asking for this because of what my last name is. I'm asking because I've earned it. Bernard nodded slowly. All in favor of appointing Arlene Whitmore as Chief Executive Officer? 10 hands went up. Julian's did not. Neither did the hand of Preston Cole, Julian's friend from college who sat on the board. Motion carries, Bernard announced. I was CEO. The reality of it hit me like cold water. I had about 30 seconds to process it before Julian stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is illegal. I'm calling our attorneys. Mitchell, still standing, cleared his throat. While we're conducting business, there's one more matter. He placed a new folder in front of each board member. These are the findings of a forensic audit conducted on the sales department's financial practices over the past 3 years. I watched Julian's face drain of color. The audit reveals approximately $197,000 in questionable expenses, including personal travel billed as business trips, payments to vendors that can't be verified, and expense reports that violate company policy. Mitchell looked at Julian directly. As CEO, Arlene has the authority to address this matter. I'd planned a speech. I'd rehearsed it in my car that morning. Something professional and detached, explaining that Julian's employment was terminated effective immediately for cause. But when I looked at him, at his perfect hair and expensive suit and the sudden panic in his eyes, all I could think about was last Friday. About standing in front of 14 people while he called me an obese patient. About 19 years of his condescension. Julian, I said quietly, you're fired. He laughed. It was a nervous, disbelieving sound. You can't fire me. I'm a vice president. Dad hired me. I'm the CEO, I said. And yes, I can. Security will escort you out. You have 1 hour to clear your personal items from your office. Company property, including the laptop and phone, stays here. The board meeting ended in stunned silence. Bernard shook my hand firmly. Your father would be proud, he said, though I wasn't sure that was true. Preston Cole stormed out behind Julian, already on his phone. Mitchell began collecting documents. I stood at the head of the table, Dad's seat, now my seat, and felt the weight of what I'd just done. My assistant, Vanessa, appeared in the doorway. She'd been with the company for 12 years. The staff knows something's happening, she said carefully. What should I tell them? I took a breath. Schedule an all-hands meeting for this afternoon. Everyone needs to hear this from me directly. As she left, I allowed myself one moment of private victory. I'd done it. I was CEO. And Julian was gone. The all-hands meeting was tense. 300 employees packed into the warehouse floor, standing among the filtration equipment and shipping pallets. I'd never addressed everyone at once before. Julian had always insisted he should be the face of the company because he was better with people. I stood on a small platform near the loading dock, microphone in hand, looking out at faces I'd known for years. By now you've probably heard that there have been leadership changes, I began. My voice echoed off the metal walls. Effective today, I've been appointed CEO. Julian Whitmore is no longer with the company. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I pushed on. I know this is sudden. I know some of you have questions. What I want you to know is that this company, our company, is stable and strong. I spent the rest of that week in back-to-back meetings, reassuring clients, briefing department heads, and reviewing every aspect of operations that I didn't already know by heart. The sales department was a mess. Julian had spent more time managing his image than managing his team. Contracts were poorly documented, follow-ups were inconsistent, and 3 major clients were on the verge of leaving because nobody had returned their calls in weeks. I promoted Angela Reed, a senior sales associate who'd been overlooked for years, to interim VP of sales. She nearly cried when I told her. Julian said I didn't have executive presence, she admitted. Julian was an idiot, I replied. By Friday my office, formerly Dad's office, now mine, was organized. I'd removed Julian's degrees from the wall and replaced them with the company's founding documents and photos of our team. Julian didn't go quietly. By Monday of the second week, I had 3 threatening letters from his attorney demanding reinstatement and claiming wrongful termination. Mitchell handled them easily. He has no case, Mitchell assured me. The audit is ironclad, and the harassment documentation provides additional grounds. He's posturing. But Julian wasn't just posturing legally. He was spreading rumors. I heard from 3 different clients that Julian was telling people I'd staged a hostile takeover while Dad was helpless. That I'd forged documents. That I was running the company into the ground. One client, Mr. Brixton, called me directly. I've worked with your family for 20 years, he said carefully. Julian's saying some concerning things. I wanted to hear your side. I spent an hour walking him through everything, the legal documents, Dad's wishes, Julian's financial misconduct. By the end, Brixton sighed. I believe you. The hardest part was visiting Dad. He was improving slowly, relearning words and movements. But when I told him I was CEO, his face crumpled with confusion. Julian, he kept saying. Where's Julian? I held his hand. Julian had to leave the company, Dad. He wasn't following the rules. Dad's eyes filled with tears. He didn't understand the details, but he understood his son was gone. I felt like I'd torn something irreparable. Derek found me crying in the car afterward. You did the right thing, he insisted. I know, I whispered. But it still hurts. That night, I dreamed about the board meeting, about Julian's face when I fired him. In the dream, he laughed, and I realized too late that I'd made a terrible mistake. I woke up at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat. 3 months into my tenure as CEO, Whitmore Industries was thriving. We landed 2 new contracts worth $15 million combined. Employee satisfaction scores went up for the first time in years. Angela built a real sales strategy focused on relationships instead of charm. The operations division I'd spent 19 years building continued to run smoothly under my former deputy, Marcus Wu. The financial irregularities were resolved. Julian had agreed to a payment plan to avoid criminal charges, paying back the money in installments. Preston Cole resigned from the board after it became clear he'd known about some of Julian's questionable expenses and said nothing. Bernard Hughes took me to lunch and admitted, I knew Julian wasn't right for leadership. But your father loved him, and I didn't want to cause family trouble. I appreciated his honesty, even if it came too late. Julian and I haven't spoken since the day I fired him. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that he's working at a competitor's company in a mid-level sales position. No special treatment, no corner office. Just regular work for regular pay. Sometimes I wonder if I could have handled things differently. Maybe if I'd confronted him privately about the harassment. Maybe if I'd talked to Dad before the stroke. But then I remember standing in that boardroom, feeling small and humiliated, while 14 people said nothing. I remember 19 years of being dismissed and overlooked. And I know that what I did wasn't just about revenge. It was about claiming what I'd earned. It was about saying, I'm done being invisible. It was about proving that competence matters more than charm. Last week, I received an envelope at my office. Inside was a single piece of paper, a handwritten note from Dad. His therapist must have helped him write it. The letters were shaky but legible. Arlene, proud of you. Right choice. Love, Dad. I cried reading it. I'd been so afraid that he'd hate me for what I'd done to Julian. But somewhere in his healing brain, Dad understood. He understood that I'd saved the company. That I'd protected what he built. That I'd become exactly what he needed me to be. I framed the note and hung it behind my desk, next to the photo of the company's founding day. When I need courage, I look at it. When I doubt myself, I remember, this was always supposed to be mine. Being CEO isn't easy. I work 70-hour weeks. I make decisions that affect 300 families. I negotiate contracts, manage crises, and balance budgets. But I also get to shape the company's future. I started a mentorship program for young employees. I revised our workplace harassment policies. I increased funding for safety equipment and training. I made sure that nobody else would ever feel like I felt in that boardroom. Small, dismissed, invisible. The company is better because I'm leading it. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. But I fix them. And every day, I prove that I belong here. Not because of my last name. Because of my work. Because I earned this chair, this title, this responsibility. One decision at a time. One contract at a time. One day at a time. 6 months after I became CEO, Julian requested a meeting. I almost refused, but Derek convinced me to hear him out. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, far from the office. Julian looked different. Tired. Humbler. I'm not here to apologize, he started. Yes, you are, I interrupted. He stopped. For the first time in our lives, I watched my younger brother struggle for words. Okay, he finally said. I am. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I was threatened by you. I always was. Dad praised you constantly, and I felt like I had to tear you down to matter. I sipped my coffee. His apology felt incomplete, performative, but it was something. I forgive you, I said, surprising myself. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You can't work at Whitmore again. That door is closed. Julian nodded. I know. We talked for another 30 minutes, not as CEO and disgraced ex-executive, but as siblings who'd both been trapped in the same impossible dynamic. When we parted, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt free. The weight I'd carried for 19 years, the need to prove myself to him, to Dad, to everyone, was finally gone. I'd already proven it. I walked back to my office, sat in my chair, and got back to work. There was a company to run, and I was exactly where I belonged.